Baseball Commissioner Rob Manfred might actually be the savior White Sox fans have been looking for, or he might be parroting Jerry Reinsdorf's talking points. Let's discuss his comments on the Sox staying in Chicago long-term next on Locked On White Sox.
You are Locked On White Sox, your daily Chicago White Sox podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, I'm your host, Todd Welter, a lifelong Sox fan and the site expert of SouthsideShowdown.com, part of the FanSided Network. And also I've covered Major League Baseball for outlets such as the Associated Press. And thanks for making Locked On White Sox your first listen every day, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And make sure to hit the like button on today's episode. Subscribe to the YouTube channel at Locked On White Sox if you've not done so already. And also follow or subscribe to the show at wherever you get your podcasts. Well, MLB Commissioner Rob Manfred did briefly address the White Sox long-term prospects in Chicago yesterday, and I want to discuss the mixed message in the first segment. Then let's discuss why the Yankees and Dodgers owe the Sox a big thank you. And finally, let's address some updates in the Chicago White Sox manager search. Today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONMLB for $20 off your first purchase. All right. I wouldn't trust MLB Commissioner Rob Manfred's comments about him being confident that Chicago will have two MLB teams long term. The man once endorsed Oakland, and look at how he abandoned that city the moment owner John Fisher secured his funding for a new park in Las Vegas. However, Rob Manfred has said in the past that he's a proponent of expansion, and owner Jerry Reinsdorf did lead a charge to keep Rob from getting the commissioner job in the first place. So maybe one way to stick it to Reinsdorf is block any threat of moving. Plus, from a business standpoint, it makes sense to put an expansion team in Nashville and say Salt Lake or Portland or even Montreal. Sorry, Charlotte, you're too close to the Music City, and collect the expansion fee while using whoever loses the musical chairs, that musical chairs expansion game, as leverage for another team to relocate to. So again, I always say, don't worry about Charlotte. Don't worry about Nashville. Worry about Charlotte, for example. Worry about Portland. Worry about maybe even Montreal. Or, but I would say if the Sox did relocate to Montreal, we should all still become Montreal Expos fans. We should stay Sox fans, basically. And hopefully they change the name because baseball is better with the Montreal Expos. I've always believed that. Anyways, it makes business sense, though, to keep the White Sox in Chicago in general because sharing the market, I think, is always overblown. The Sox don't have to, if they go to Nashville, they wouldn't have to share the market. All a White Sox owner has to do to gain interest is put a winner on the field. Or maybe start advocating for the neighborhood where Guaranteed Rate Field is that it's actually safe. Stop advancing the stereotype that Bridgeport is unsafe, that Bridgeport is unsavory, because that was the main takeaway from Rob Manfred's comments as he basically parroted Jerry's belief that the South Side is no longer viable to support the Sox. All right, so here's what Rob Manfred said when asked by former 670 The Score host Danny Parkins, now on FS1's Breakfast Ball. Rob Manfred made an appearance on the show. I think he felt it was going to be like this fun tour to celebrate baseball, to preview the World Series. And then Danny dropped this question about the White Sox prospects in Chicago long-term. And here's what Manfred said, quote, "Chicago is an anchor city for us. I think that the White Sox are in a difficult situation. I think the location of the stadium is tough, but I have confidence that things are going to work out in Chicago and that we're going to continue to have two teams in Chicago." All right. This is what he once said, though. He can have confidence all he wants in two teams in Chicago, but this is what he once said about Oakland back in 2016, as reported by SFGate.com. Quote, "I'm committed to Oakland as a major league site," Manfred said Tuesday. If we were to leave Oakland, I think 10 years from now, we would be more likely than not looking backward saying we made a mistake. I think the growth in that area, the way the growth has moved up into San Francisco, I think Oakland is more likely than not to be a better market 5 years from now than it is today. So I certainly have not given up on Oakland, end quote. So the man once said 8 years ago that Oakland was a viable market, that baseball would be making a mistake to ever leave Oakland. And now it's on its way to Las Vegas, a smaller market than Oakland, a tourist town, a town that is loving the Golden Knights because it organically grew. But the Raiders, they're usually drawing, if you look at their crowds are usually full of other teams' fans. They're not drawing from Vegas. They're drawing from the tourism. And it's not to say that, Oakland can't thrive on that in the beginning. I mean, the Vegas, the Athletics can't thrive on that in the beginning. But eventually, baseball plays 81 home games a year. Eventually that shine of, hey, let's go to Vegas and check out our team in Vegas and have the weekend might wear off. I don't know. That's just me. And again, the longest you should stay in Vegas, 3 days. That's the most. But he certainly did an about face toward Oakland the moment John Fisher secured assistance to build a new stadium in Las Vegas. He went from being that advocate for Oakland to slamming the city for not delivering what Vegas could. Even though it's been well reported that Fisher did a terrible job of trying to develop a new park in Oakland. I mean, it was just the reporting got to the point where it seems like Fisher had no intention of staying in Oakland once he bought the team. He looked at it and was probably like wanting to get out. Now, from what I've read too, I mean, it's not like Oakland is without blame, but it's mostly, if you're going to put the blame on all the reports from what you're reading and what you're hearing, it would be on John Fisher. Although, say what you want about Fisher, but even he's realistic about what taxpayers are willing to even pay for or what to push for. I mean, the park in Vegas is estimated to cost $1.5 billion, and he's only getting but he only got $350 million from Nevada and Las Vegas. And again, I'm putting this in the context before you're like, taxpayer funds should never go to stadiums. I fully agree, unless it's infrastructure costs. I got no problem with roads and train stops and all that, because you would be technically using that every day. But I'm putting this in the context of how bad this makes Jerry Reinsdorf look again for his ask in terms of funding for a new stadium. He's asking for $1.7 billion from hardworking taxpayers to build his $1.9 billion legacy stadium, as he's only willing to put in $200 million. Yet, by the United Center, him and the Hawks, because he's got a co-signer, basically, he's willing to develop that entire area. So if I'm a lawmaker in Illinois, not only am I using the Chicago Fire's owner recent comments that stadiums should be privately funded, but I would cite that the A's still use the relocation leverage and got a fraction of the cost of a new stadium for the park's construction. And that's another thing. Just remember, folks, when you're like, oh, these cities might build the Sox new stadium to get them to come. Vegas only contributed $350 million. Okay. Now, again, you can have your thoughts on how much public funds should go towards, and would a stadium, would a city just build them a stadium? But it's not like a lot of these cities are just gonna be like, here's a blank check, like it used to be, like when Tampa was like, here's Tropicana Field. That's kind of going away, obviously. But anyways, Rob Manfred could have an axe to grind with Jerry Reinsdorf about Jerry's attempt to block his rise to commissioner, but Rob has always taken orders. Rob does what he's told. If Jerry or whoever is the new owner can get his fellow owners to rally around a relocation, well, Rob Manfred's going to do what he's told, because obviously he did that with Oakland, for example. Plus, Manfred could say whatever he wants. He's out in 2029. He's retiring just in time for the White Sox lease to expire at Guaranteed Rate Field. And you don't think Jerry or whoever buys the club will try to make sure an even more owner-friendly commissioner is put in place? I think so. So that's why I really can't trust Rob Manfred's comments. Although that's why I do believe, for the good of the game, the commissioner's salary should be funded in part by the MLBPA. I know it's harsh. I know it's extreme, but at least you would have the commissioner serving the interests of baseball and not just the owners. Just a suggestion. But the location of the park is just a joke. I'm tired of this. And it echoes Jerry's belief about the neighborhood Guaranteed Rate Field is in, the neighborhood that has been supporting White Sox baseball for over 124 years. Because this is what he told Cranes when the stadium mission was launched. Quote, the economics of baseball have completely changed, with top ball players signing contracts worth as much as $700 million, Reinsdorf said. At the location we are at now, we can't generate the revenue needed to pay those salaries, he said, referring to the team's heavily residential Bridgeport home. A new space in a livelier downtown area with shops, bars, and other entertainment venues within walking distance should do better, he contends. Reinsdorf denied that the real problem is poor performance by his team. Even after winning the World Series in 2005, quote, we didn't crack the 3 million attendance mark, end quote, something that series winners routinely accomplish. Okay. You didn't crack the 3 million mark, but you still had 2.9 million come through the turnstiles in 2006. And Jerry, you had a new ballpark in 1991 and you still drew 2.9 million. Also, that 2006 you claim is bad. That was the Sox highest total draw ever in team history, ever. A lot of this has nothing to do with Bridgeport. It says Jerry building a new park that has the charm of parking lots because it's surrounded by parking lots. He wanted the parking lot revenue instead of now what is in vogue, having the neighborhood, having the restaurants, having the bars, having the hotels, having the condos around your park being the center. And you could have had it because it was well reported that you were offered a Camden Yards-like stadium, the Armour Park project, as they called it. And he said no. He wanted those parking lot revenue, and he still does. And I'm tired of the park isn't in a safe neighborhood. That's one thing Jerry is trying to convince you with the fan getting shot in the stands. He says, I came from out of the park because he doesn't want you to, he doesn't want the possibility that his security force somehow allowed a gun to get through the security metal detectors. That's just the speculation, okay? I'm not reporting that as fact. But he just doesn't want you to think, well, security failed. And any outsiders listening, say Cubs fans who want to advance the stereotype of, hey, regular people can conceal carry, okay? It's possible that a gun could have gone through security. We don't know. It's a pretty weird theory that Jerry has. But anyways, maybe there was a time that Bridgeport was rough, but it's not anymore. This is from Movado.com. The Bridgeport, Chicago neighborhood ranks safer than 45% of the neighborhoods in the United States. Roughly 4 violent crimes occur annually per 1,000 residents, less than half of that of Chicago overall. Roughly 25 property crimes occur annually per 1,000 residents in the Bridgeport, Chicago neighborhoods, which is lower than the Chicago overall 36 average, but slightly higher than the state of Illinois 23 average. In comparison with other areas in Chicago, Bridgeport is a relatively safe place to live. It's got great restaurants, 670 The Score, Lawrence Homes, Spiegel and Holmes and Shane Reardon, who I'm trying to get back on the, trying to actually get on the show at some point. We're working it out, have advocated that Bridgeport's actually nice now. It's not what I remember my dad telling me stories about how my grandpa had to pay a kid to watch his car back in the 50s and the 60s. And even I've always maintained, if you're wearing White Sox gear, you're fine. Okay. I remember the last game I went to was about, I think it was 2016, 2017 or whatever. I really had to use the bathroom. My wife kind of read about the stereotypes, thought, me stopping at the Shell station was unsafe. And I'm like, we're fine. And it was. Ran to the bathroom, came back out, found parking. And if you want to cite that radio host getting attacked in Armour Square Park, that was almost 30 years ago. And fans getting onto the field to assault umpires, that's almost 20 years ago. It's time to let these stereotypes go. And I've always said this too. Around the immediate ballpark area, there's plenty of security. The park is easily accessible from the L and the expressway. And if you want to avoid the loop traffic that can jam up, you can easily get on Ashland and drive on in. Stop blaming the areas why the team can't draw and look in the mirror, Jerry. It wasn't the Cubs' fault that they stayed on WGN and had the big name draw, in the 1980s while the Sox left for cable, because that's another reason why you've been floundering behind the Cubs forever. You allowed the Cubs to become a name brand because you left for the cable money. And it wasn't, it was actually Jerry's fault that you have to go a couple blocks or Chinatown to find good places to eat before the game or get a drink after it. That's Jerry's fault. And he wants you to pay for his mistakes. Well, the World Series starts tomorrow, and the Dodgers and Yankees owe the Sox a thank you card. I'll explain why after the break on Locked On White Sox. Hey, NFL fans, you can start the season with a big return on FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. So when you get a hunch in the middle of the game, you can check out the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more on the same page where you place your bets. You'll get started with $200 in bonus bets guaranteed when you place your first $5 bet. Now, the traditional spreads, money lines, and over-unders are always fun to play on FanDuel, but it's the props, parlays, and futures where you can really hit it big. Popular parlay for tonight's Rams and Vikings games is Kyren Williams, Justin Jefferson, Aaron Jones, and Cooper Kupp anytime touchdowns. That is at plus 1179. So if you place $10 on that and it hits, you can win $117.99. America may not like ties, but if you want to triple your money, the Bears and Commanders ending the first quarter this Sunday, all square, is at plus 300. And the Blackhawks, losing the past 2 games, has moved their making the playoffs to plus 1,000. So if you're a diehard and think, all it's going to take is Connor Bedard to start scoring some goals, and they can sneak into the playoffs. Even a buck could then turn into $10 if they defy the odds. That's FanDuel.com. Welcome back into Locked On White Sox. I'm your host, Todd Welter. Again, make sure to hit the like button on today's episode and subscribe to the YouTube channel at Locked On White Sox if you've not done so already. And if you can't catch the show on YouTube, Locked On White Sox is available on all major podcast platforms, so make sure to follow or subscribe on places such as Apple and Spotify. Either way, get your 30-minute fix of Chicago White Sox baseball venting with me. All right, so everydayers have heard me pan what was essentially a trade deadline deal where the Sox traded Eric Fedde to the Cardinals, Michael Kopech to the Dodgers, along with St. Louis sending Tommy Edman to L.A., while the Sox basically just got Miguel Vargas and 2 other prospects, one who had a broken leg. And I also have gone over how the Yankees got reliever Jake Cousins from the Sox in a misguided spring training deal, who became, Cousins went on to become a viable arm for the New York Yankees bullpen this season, while the Sox bullpen was terrible, blew leads left and right. It was a huge reason why the Sox lost an historic 121 games. So why am I bringing up this again? Why the Yankees and the Dodgers have exploited the Sox? Well, it's because those 2 teams got to the World Series in part because of the Sox poor decisions. Now, first, before Yankees and Dodgers fans, you jumped down my throat. Yes, your team spends money. I'm very jealous. Your team makes great trades. Very jealous. And it's because your team also realizes, even though they're a huge market, and they have huge television contracts, they can actually, if they also act like the Rays and the Guardians and the Brewers, if you act like a small market team where you emphasize draft and development, you can use those prospects to become your next generation of new stars, or you can use them to leverage to get players that put you over the top. It's not always in free agency. That's the other thing. Everybody's like, oh, the Dodgers went and got Shohei Ohtani and Mookie Betts and Freddie Freeman in free agency. Yes, they did, but they also leveraged their great farm system to get key pieces like Michael Kopech. Same thing with the Yankees. You don't get Juan Soto if you have terrible prospects. So I'm just saying, yes, I fully acknowledge you. But the Sox poor decisions, or in the case of Tim Hill, potentially being, the Sox backwards way of doing things, still flying on basically the equivalent of a Spirit Airlines plane, those types of things. The culture did help benefit the Yankees once Tim Hill was freed. And Tim Hill was terrible for the Sox. Don't get me wrong. The reliever was so bad he deserved to be DFA'd. But he goes to the Yankees. And suddenly he rediscovers his ability to get outs. He went from a 5.87 ERA and a 2.22 WHIP in 27 appearances for the Sox to a 2.05 ERA and a 1.02 WHIP in New York in 35 appearances. Suddenly you put those Yankees pinstripes on and you just wash away that stink of playing for the Sox. Suddenly you're like, you know what? I signed with the Sox because I know I was going to get some innings and maybe get traded to a contender, but you know what? Getting released isn't bad either. He fell up. And he's also been darn good in the playoffs. Pitched in all 5 games of the ALCS. Did have a rough game 1 where he did allow 3 hits and a run in a third of an inning. But then he just allowed 2 hits over the next 4 outings, including 2 appearances where he pitched over an inning. Got a key out in game 3 in the 5th inning when it was 2-1 Yankees. Jose Ramirez got on with a double, comes in, gets Josh Naylor to fly out. He's been helpful. He's been a vital left-handed reliever out of the pen. Something the Sox were hoping for, and then possibly leverage in a trade deadline deal, and it didn't work out. And he falls up. And hey, New York, you're welcome for the Sox being such a dysfunctional mess that it probably did seep into Hill. He was just like, oh man, putting on the Sox uniform, like, oh, the awful leads to awful. And the Sox just had no choice but to put him out of his misery on the South Side. He was freed, and he suddenly returns to being a good reliever. And still there was, Carlos Rodon, who the Sox decided after the 2021 season to not give another 1 year higher price prove it deal. Again, keyword, another 1 year higher price prove it deal, because that's basically what the Giants gave him after the Sox realized, you know what, we can't keep trusting him because he does eventually get hurt. Giants do it. Guess what? He helps them, stays healthy, and he's now on the Yankees helping them get to the World Series. They're 41st, by the way. The team, though, that owes the Sox the biggest thank you card between the two is the Dodgers. Or maybe they just owe us Sox fans a, I'm sorry, your GM is a moron. Because LA team president Andrew Freeman, he reportedly, caught wind that the Sox did want to trade Eric Fetty to the Cardinals for Tommy Edman, a player Freeman has reportedly long coveted. He swoops in and somehow not only gets Edman, but gets a much better version of Michael Kopech for a song. That's the one thing that has been missing here. The NLCS MVP was on his way to Chicago. And yes, he was hurt most of the season. He was 29. It wouldn't have been a great deal for Eric Fetty. But when healthy, he has posted WAR seasons over 2 at least. I believe his career high is 6.3 B WAR, and I believe that was 2022. So Freeman is a solid baseball player, obviously. Very good baseball player. And if he had to, you add that type of value to the Sox lineup, considering Sox didn't have any players with a WAR over 2, the name might not have been great, but it still would have helped. But Freeman dangles his prospects in front of Sox GM Chris Getz, and suddenly Getz acts like a kitten. Like, I could see him pawing at that, with a toy in front of it, starts pouncing. And Getz throws in a reliever market, and he gets Miguel Vargas and 2 scratch-off prospects, one who comes damaged. And what does LA get? Because this is the thing why I'm reviewing this again, is a hitter who drives in 11 runs and a dominant reliever. Edman was the NLCS MVP over Shohei Ohtani. Think about that. Because of his key ability to, get some runs in. And Kopech has obviously been dominant since going to LA. Obviously, he was showing those signs in Chicago before being traded. I heard his market, John Heyman was on the score saying that his market wasn't great, but still, if you traded Kopech separately, you might have been able to get a better return. You got a decent, even though it was a low A guy, you got a decent one for Tanner Banks. And yes, Tanner Banks was relatively good, but he also had an ERA over 4. And all it took, obviously, for Kopech to start showing signs of becoming a dominant reliever was hiring Scott Boras, who probably told him, listen to your pitch plan and you'll get paid, buddy. Otherwise, if you keep doing what you're doing, where you just want to throw harder and harder, you will be out of baseball. I'm just imagining that's probably how the conversation went. But just that decision to package Fetty and Kopech together instead of trading them separately has obviously helped the Dodgers get over the hump. And maybe that is why the Sox are keen on hiring their next manager from the Dodgers. And speaking of the manager search, got a couple of nuggets of news to discuss after the break on Locked On White Sox. One of my favorite baseball memories as a kid was when my dad took me to Game 1 of the 1993 ALCS. The result was not great as the Chicago White Sox lost 7-3 and the news of Michael Jordan's retirement leaked out. But still, the crowd was great until the Jordan news leaked out. And it was fun to see my heroes live playing for something. And if you get a chance to go to a baseball playoff game, I hope you use the Game Time app. Game Time makes it easier to save more on sports, concerts, comedy, and theater. Game Time is an authorized ticket marketplace of Major League Baseball, which makes getting tickets faster and easier. Prices on the Game Time app actually go down the closer it gets to the first pitch. With killer last-minute deals, all-in prices, views from your seat, and their lowest price guarantee, Game Time takes the guesswork out of buying MLB tickets. Get a panoramic view from your seat in the app before you buy, the lowest price guarantee, or Game Time will credit you 110% of the difference. Take the guesswork out of buying MLB tickets and more with Game Time picks. Now, download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONMLB for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONMLB for $20 off. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. And welcome back into Locked On White Sox. I'm your host, Todd Welter. Again, shout out to all my everydayers. Appreciate your loyalty. Obviously, please hit the like button on today's episode. If you're listening audio, could always use a 5-star review. Really would appreciate it. Love the community that we're building on the YouTube page. Like I said, White Sox Twitter community, awesome. I want to have that the same in our Locked On White Sox YouTube page, and I think we're getting some great insights and some comments. So let's keep interacting. Feel free to email me at lockedonwhitesox@gmail.com. Let's just not be Facebook. Ooh. You should see the comments on SouthsideShowdown.com page. It's a dark place. But then again, being a White Sox fan can be a dark place. And also recommend to your fellow Sox fans or baseball fan friends to subscribe to the YouTube channel at Locked On White Sox or wherever they get their podcasts, as the show is available on all major platforms. Okay, so you can remove a name from the potential list of managerial candidates, and maybe a veteran manager is actually very much in the mix. And another top name is at least still in the mix for now. So those are the three nuggets I want to discuss. The name that is out of the running, I'll admit, I would have been excited to have named as the White Sox next manager, but I would prefer his fellow coaching staff mate. And the name possibly very much in the mix, I don't want in the mix. All right, so Dallas Morning News Rangers beat reporter Evan Green tweeted this out yesterday at Evan_P Grant, P_Grant. Heard from multiple people that Rangers offensive coordinator bench coach Donnie Ecker is no longer involved in the White Sox managerial hunt. Ecker will remain with the Rangers. He was then asked in a tweet from the handle at Hookem214 about Will Venable, and Evan replied that he's not heard Venable being out of the conversation. So I talked about Ecker's resume on a few shows back. Would have loved to have had him be the manager, especially with his hitting background. But at the same time, if there's a chance Venable is going to leave Texas for the White Sox, I'm taking Venable over Ecker. I discussed Venable's background too a few shows back, so feel free to check those out. And I would take the guy like Venable that actually worked with Theo Epstein in a front office, then with Joe Madden and Bruce Bochy in a clubhouse. And also Venable made it to the show. That's why he's one of my favorite candidates in this search. That's just a better apprenticeship to becoming a potentially good manager. And remember, the goal should be going beyond finding a guy that'll get you through the rebuild. You want to find someone who, yes, can develop the players that you want to bring up or that you want to give a runway to, but you want to get the guy that gets you out of climbing from rock bottom to winning a title, whether that's the division, the ALCS, or the World Series. You want to get it through the whole process. And to me, the Rangers sound like they're convinced that Venable can be that guy that keeps you, winning titles after Bruce Bochy retires. But the one sliver of hope that Venable would leave Texas is Bochy stays in the clubhouse for a while. And he decides, I don't want to stick around. I don't want to wait. And maybe Chris Getz, because he's convincing Jerry Reinsdorf to do all these changes, maybe he convinces Jerry to open his pocketbook and pay Venable to come to the South Side. Now, Ryan McGuffey is back with a new Sox podcast. And yes, there's more podcasts probably per fans, but it's great. Co-host of the 670 The Scores Inside the Clubhouse, Ryan McGuffey was also formerly of NBC Sports Chicago, usually, pretty much the co-host of the White Sox Talk podcast that was on NBC Sports Chicago with Chuck Garfien, but he's back on ESPN Radio's Dave Kaplan's YouTube channel, The Recap. He's going to have a Sox show, and he hosted it, had his first episode. He's going to co-host it with former Sox outfielder Brian Anderson. It's a great show. Make sure to subscribe. Make sure to listen to it. I just always ask that you listen to me first. But he shared this, Brian Anderson shared this nugget on the first episode that now granted it is in Anderson's opinion, but after talking with one of his former coaches, Buck Showalter is very much in the mix. No, please no. Now there was speculation that Showalter has been angling for the job behind the scenes as he wants to get back into the game. And he is a 4-time manager of the year. He's managed in the playoffs. He's very successful, but he's not the right manager for the Sox at this time. After Ricky Renteria was fired, sure, I would have rather had Showalter hired over Tony La Russa, for example. But dealing with a massive rebuild, not the guy. You saw how the Orioles rotted so badly, and when they started to go with the youth movement, he wasn't the guy for the job anymore. Now, Anderson at least did give one logical reason why you'd bring in Showalter to the White Sox at this point in their where they're at, and is to groom a younger guy to take over as the skipper in a few years. I mean, Bruce Bochy is doing that with in Texas with Venable, Pat Murphy in Milwaukee. Mentioned Milwaukee. Anyways, he's doing that with Ricky Weeks. However, this team is already at rock bottom. That think about it. An 11-game improvement next season would still put the Sox at 110 losses. Heck, a 22-win improvement is what is needed to avoid a third straight year of 100 losses. So you don't need a mentor or a supervisor for the eventual guy at this point. At this point, just hire if you are so convinced that, for example, Clayton McCullough or George Lombard or Will Venable is the guy that's not only going to get you through this period, but through the entire period, just hire them. They don't need to be groomed. Let them learn on the job, because their negative WAR right now, if they can learn from their mistakes to become either a net neutral manager or a positive WAR manager, I am fine with that in this context. One thing though, McGuffey did allude to in his show about Clayton McCullough, he's probably still the front runner. Now, he did say, he's getting that from his co-host Bruce Levine on Inside the Clubhouse, but he did make a good point. If the Sox don't name a manager basically today, because today is the last day to make a major announcement, as baseball hates anything overshadowing the World Series, it could be that McCullough is the guy, because technically he can't be named manager until the Dodgers season ends, which would be after the World Series. So if nothing is announced today, that could be a clue that Clayton McCullough is the guy that the Sox will go with. And while I would rather have Venable or, Lombard, McCullough, hey, can never hurt to get a guy from the Dodgers organization. Well, that wraps up this edition of Locked On White Sox. Thank you for making Locked On White Sox your first listen today. For your second listen, find Locked On MLB. Baseball guru Sully brings a daily blend of humor and baseball, keeping you updated on every aspect of the playoff picture. Find Locked On MLB on YouTube or wherever you listen to your podcast. And I'll be back tomorrow to discuss how the Sox prospects are doing in the Arizona Fall League with Ian Eskridge of FutureSox.com. Feel free to leave comments about today's topics regarding Rob Manfred's comments about the Sox long-term future in Chicago, the Yankees and Dodgers needing to send a thank you card, and a couple of nuggets in the Sox manager search. You can leave them at the episode page on YouTube, X, formerly Twitter, at Todd J. Dub or at Locked On Sox, or you can email me at lockedonwhitesox@gmail.com. Have a great day. I will see you tomorrow.